Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here on the mission Karmayogi Talks. And there can be no better subject than talking about the last mile. The last mile is what makes or breaks. The last mile is what makes the difference. And friends, especially when we talk about social development, all the more reason that the last mile is very well thought through, because we often make a comment that the policy was very good, but the implementation was unsatisfactory. My counter argument is, each time we say that, it shows a policy failure as it did not take into account the challenges of the last mile in the course of its drafting. It is not needed to actually make a case for social sector, but I would still do that on the basis of evidence. Many people think that the social sector is only about social justice and equality. To me, it is more than that. It's also the most sustainable way of making economic progress. Some of you may ask me, why am I saying this? I'll give you two examples, one an international one and the other a national one, which brings out the importance of educating the girl child as a priority. Friends, for those of you who've had a chance to look at studies on economic progress of countries, just on one plot the universal primary education of girls, which country achieved it and what have been the consequences. You'll find Japan achieved this at the turn of the 20th century. Till the 1930s, South Korea, China and India had very similar trajectories, but that's about the time South Korea decided that it must also do what Japan did at the turn of the century. So by the 1960s, South Korea also achieved universal primary education for girls. China followed suit. China could do it in the 1980s, and we have done at the turn of the 21st century. And look at the economic progress profiles of the nation. There is no more direct correlation than the one between educating universal primary education for girls and economic progress of nations. The UNDP in its 2023 report has brought out the fact that India successfully brought out 415 million persons out of multidimensional poverty between 2005-06 and 2019-21. Now, when you look at these states, 6 factors stand out. First and foremost, of course, is the girl child, and especially the adolescent girl in higher secondary and higher education. The second factor, which flows from this, is the decline in fertility. I had the occasion to study the sample registration system data of the census in 2010-11, and I wrote a piece for the Business Standard, why development was the best contraceptive. The relationship between fertility rate decline and completion of higher education and higher secondary education confirmed that whether it was Bihar or UP or Madhya Pradesh or Kerala, if an adolescent girl studied up to higher secondary or higher education, in all instances, the fertility rates were lower than replacement level. What this brings out is, besides these two linkages of educating adolescent girls in higher education, decline in fertility. So clearly, the third factor which made a difference to decline in poverty was the availability of maternal and child health services in the primary health care system. Why this becomes critical is because unless and until children and mothers are in better health, their regular participation in education, learning and skill development comes down. We need functional primary healthcare systems, and many of our southern Indian states were able to set it up much before many other parts of the country. The fourth important factor, when adolescent girls travel to colleges and higher secondary schools together, it creates a new identity for adolescent girls. Nobody's daughter, nobody's wife, nobody's sister, but a woman unto herself. And once this happens, it leads to the formation of women's self-help groups. Now, when women's self-help groups get constituted, many new ideas start getting into the lives of these young women. Among them, since they are already completed higher secondary or secondary level, they are able to diversify to vocational courses, ITIs, polytechnics, nursing courses, A&M courses, and so on. Now, once skill provision or skill training opportunities are available, that is the fifth factor. To that, if you add the provision of collateral-free bank loans up to rupees 10 lakhs for women's self-help groups, which was introduced by Dr. C. Rangarajan as the governor of RBI 30 years ago. All these 6 factors together led to a faster rate of decline of poverty. We also find that the expansion of the self-help group movement under the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana National Rural Livelihood Mission, where we now have 90 million women, it has made a difference. The other factor, of course, has been the whole of government and whole of society approach in what has come to be known now as pro-poor public welfare. Whether it is the provision of gas connection, electricity connection to every household, whether it is the provision of a bank account for women, the Jan Dhan accounts, the LED bulbs, immunization of infants and pregnant mothers, accident life insurance, and so on. Rural housing, rural sanitation, rural roads, the availability of easy credit, all these factors, especially over the last 10 years, have contributed to a faster reduction of multidimensional poverty, because when we talk about multidimensional poverty, we do not look only at the per capita income or the consumer expenditure. We also look at education indicators, we look at health indicators, we look at life expectancy, we look at years of schooling, we look at the quality of life seen in terms of pakka housing, cooking on safe gas, electricity in households, and so on. Clearly, these are the factors, what is referred to as the Labharthi Varg, and the development of the last mile in reaching basic services to them. The challenges are many. Many of these asset deficit removal programs have helped deprived households to access public services much better. It is in this context that social development becomes important, because unless and until we are able to secure a basic quality of life, the ability of a deprived household to access public services is limited. Friends, as we move on, especially during this very important phase of our country, what the Honorable Prime Minister calls the Amrit Kal, if we want to be a developed India by 2047, we cannot afford to be at rank 130 on Human Development Index. We need to move up closer to rank 50 than the present 130, and this would require investments in education and health. But along with investments, they will require governance and financial sector reforms which improve the quality of outcomes in these programs. Because we have seen it in the past, with a lot of public support and a proactive government, the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan was introduced for universal elementary education. As we are aware, There was a time, not so long ago, 1986-87, the 42nd round of the National Sample Survey had found 69.23% 6 plus females never enrolled in primary schools in rural India. This was not 1947, this was 86-87. Clearly there had been neglect of primary education and primary health in our initial decades of freedom. In 2014-15, the 71st round NSS for the first time reported up to class 8th in elementary schooling, boys or girls, rural or urban, attendance rates were identical. But unfortunately, the learning outcomes and their improvement has not kept pace with universal elementary education, while deprived households and their children have voted with their feet for quality education. We still have miles to go before we are able to ensure quality learning outcomes for all. And clearly, when we look at the East Asian countries, if at all we have to become a vibrant, developed India, we will need to improve the quality of human capital. We will need to move up on the skilling ladder. We will need to diversify livelihoods and incomes. We will need to provide employment on scale. And for all these, human capital is a basic necessity. Similarly, the world faced COVID, and we too in India had to live with the consequences of post-COVID slowdown. Luckily for us, the vaccine and the speed with which and the efficiency with which we were able to reach it to every household, thanks to the digital platform of CoWIN, we were able to win the battle against COVID much faster than many other countries. But having said that, we still have a long way to go as far as primary health care and quality is concerned, and its availability to every citizen right down to the last mile. There are many gaps and many challenges in spite of the efforts of the National Health Mission. Yes, it is true that at the independence, we had extremely unsatisfactory indicators of health. Our infant mortality rate was 130. It is now down to 28. Our maternal mortality was in the thousands. Thousands of women used to die in every 1 lakh women having a childbirth. We are down to 97 as per the most recent study. 97 women out of 1 lakh deliveries lose their lives in the course of childbirth, which is much lower from where we were, but we still have some way to go before we are able to reach the status of a developed country like many of the better off countries who have managed to bring it down even to single digits, not only to double but to single digits. Likewise, we have our challenges, as Sudipto Mandal, the famous economist, he travelled to Palamu district in Jharkhand, which is where he researched 45 years ago, and he wrote on what he saw. He said, "I did not get to see chronic poverty anywhere, but many families still have challenges of higher order quality of lives." He called it a glass half full, that as far as human development and social sector is concerned, while many steps we have moved forward, people have pakka housing, many of them had provision of electricity, most of them had toilets they had, but there were still some challenges on incomes and employment that we needed to work on. Friends, COVID throws up its own challenges. One has been the learning poverty in schools. When children do not have the opportunity to go to school because of a public health emergency, clearly learning outcomes become the casualty. While we have used a lot of e-learning material, but as educationists will tell you, the best way is to have a system which makes use of both a good teacher and good teaching learning material, including technology enabled teaching learning material. So blended learning is the way forward, and in many ways our country has an opportunity to do that. Friends, when we look at the delivery system, the last mile, I cannot complete the main issues without referring to the digital public infrastructure which our country has built up so effectively and efficiently. Today, any part of the country, a son or a daughter working in Mumbai, the slums of Mumbai, can transfer funds to her mother ailing in a very remote tribal pocket somewhere with a press of a button. Now, this convenience of the digital public infrastructure, the IT DBT transfer of funds into the accounts of the deprived households, the difference it makes has to be seen to be believed. I have had the occasion of managing programs like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the Rural Livelihood Mission, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, the National Social Assistance Program for pensions, and in all of them, we could ensure that monies reach those for whom it is meant. Technology plays a very important role, but technology is not an end in itself. Technology is a means to an end. But foremost of all, as Honorable Prime Minister mentions many times, what matters is a whole of government, whole of society, community connect movement, where we are able to build on the capacities and strength of each of the players to be able to provide social development to everyone. Our gains on what we refer to now as pro-poor public welfare, each of the programs had a well thought out last mile connect, whether it was the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, the Jan Dhan Yojana, the accident insurance, Mission Indradhanush in immunization. Each of these had a very clear plan, the Ujjwala gas connection. First, the identification of the beneficiary was very scientific, using the data from the socio-economic census. And second, a lot of the challenges of the field in 2018, over 2 campaigns called the Gram Swaraj Abhiyan, under which the task assigned to us was to reach 7 services to 63,974 purposively selected villages, about 10% of India. These were villages where vulnerable social groups had a majority, the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. And we had to provide 7 basic services to all of them: gas connection under Ujjwala, Saubhagya electricity connection to every household, LED bulbs to all those who wanted it, provision for Jan Dhan bank accounts for all, accident insurance, life insurance, and Mission Indradhanush immunization for all. I had the privilege of being the coordinator for this program. When the central government officials, the state government officials, the local government, the panchayat, the women self-help groups, community organizations, everybody came together, from the chairman of Indian Oil to the power grid chairman. Everybody was in the field trying to ensure that in a finite given time to be able to provide these 7 services to all the selected villages. In that process, many constraints were identified. For example, with the gas connection, one challenge has been that many poor households often find it very difficult to provide 1,300 rupees at one go. In many states of the country, especially in desert areas where carrying heavy cylinders was difficult, in spite of the road network, because in some parts of Rajasthan desert areas, households are in their different dhanis, and every dhani is a unit to itself. So that last mile there has to be done through physical labor. So this request came, why don't we have 5 kg cylinders? In many states, the 5 kg cylinder, the simplification of the eKYC process. So when you have a campaign like Gram Swaraj Abhiyan, with the last mile as the focus, with an objective to be able to reach each one of them, with everyone working together, from Power Grid to Oil India to Indian Oil to BPCL, all of them, many of these programs are able to reach where they have to. But friends, sustainable economic progress requires infrastructure on which there is a focus, requires private sector investment, requires employment and higher incomes. As in all parts of the world, the COVID period led to very poor households exhausting their reserves to meet the requirements. Incomes shrank for a while, and clearly it had consequences for the savings of poor households. So friends, for these reasons, incomes and employment remain very, very critical in sustaining progress. The services sector, the manufacturing sector, they all have to contribute even more than what they are currently doing. And clearly, if human capital, skill development of a level which provides an opportunity to reach services of high quality with outcomes and with all the convergence and connectivity, it does make a difference. Last point that I'd like to make about social development is that they do not lend themselves to narrow departmentalism. If I want an improvement in nutrition where we have a long way to go, stunting of children and wasting of children, and we need to do something about it immediately. It is no rocket science, but we will have to work on 8 or 10 elements which contribute to it simultaneously. We will need the availability of community workers who are able to detect early signs of undernutrition. We have to ensure the availability of food. We have to ensure behavior change, exclusive breastfeeding. We have to ensure clean and safe water for drinking. We have to ensure availability of basic medicines in the village itself. Now these are all different departments and their programs. If we don't have a strong local government with community connect, elected panchayat leaders and urban local bodies have to play a much bigger role in sustainable progress on all the elements that comprise human development, whether it is nutrition, whether it is skills, whether it is education, whether it is health, whether it is livelihoods. They all need a community platform with local governments and community organizations. The social capital of women's collectives provides an opportunity to be able to achieve much higher and better qualities. The challenge of funds, functions and functionaries is a real one for local governments. Unless and until we give it the priority it needs, there will be limitations to what we will achieve. If a child doesn't learn enough in school, it may not be only on account of factors of the classroom. If the child, the infant, has been undernourished during his infancy, it is likely that there may have been some irreversible changes to his ability to learn. And for this reason, it's very important that we provide for a horizontal platform where all programs can converge with elected panchayat leaders and the social capital of women's collectives which are there now across the country. In my own home state of Bihar, each time a panchayat does not deliver a service, and if you visit the village, what do the villagers want? Sahab, इस काम को दीदियों को दे दीजिए, जीविका दीदी को दे दीजिए, ठीक हो जाएगा. Give it to the women's collectives and they will be able to deliver. We cannot have arbitrary exercise of authority by elected local government leaders in panchayats. The best way to create the countervailing force is to have community organizations and social capital which holds elected leaders accountable for the services that they have to provide. We will have to decentralize, we will have to create human resources through innovative ways of providing the last mile services, and in this light the programs which have done well have always invested in the last mile. The ASHA worker to whom we owe the access to basic vaccination down the line, the work of the community resource persons, the banking correspondent Sakhi, the bank Sakhi, the Pashu Sakhi, the Krishi Sakhi of the livelihood mission. We have more than 400,000 such women whom we call community resource persons. They have all themselves come out of poverty, and today they provide leadership to the other women in other parts of the country to be able to do so. This is the finest example of national integration, where women from Kerala, Bihar, Andhra Pradesh have gone and lived for months in Mizoram, Arunachal and other places to form self-help groups of the livelihood mission and to assist and facilitate better agriculture, better animal resource rearing and the provision for the women's banking correspondent. At the end, friends, we have to bear in mind that if the most positive thing you are looking for in India in 2023, it is the presence of these women's collectives, the banking correspondents among them. Why I say that technology is not an end in itself, it's only a means. I'll illustrate by mentioning to you how we struggled to place a banking correspondent from among the women's self-help group members, and we needed to do so because otherwise that 90-year-old widow on her deathbed could not be paid her pension there. This is only possible when we invest in the last mile. Honorable Prime Minister in the Independence Day address talked about 2 crore Lakhpati women. These are the women from the livelihood mission to whom credit is being made available, for whom skills are being provided, and the social capital that they already have built up over the years. That is the way to go. A women-led development, a women-led collective as a countervailing presence to ensure better services in remote areas. We had to provide public transport in remote areas. In many of the left-wing affected areas, we found in spite of good roads, nobody was daring to run a public transport service there. We approached our women's collectives in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh and other states in the left-wing affected areas. We said, we'll give you a interest-free loan. Will you run a public transport? Today we have more than 2,500 such public transport which are run by women, the Ajivika Express, in such remote areas. Similarly, more than 25,000 custom hiring centers in rural India are today managed by women. Women provide services to farmers from soil testing to pump sets to power tiller and so on at a cost. There are many other examples of good farmer producer companies in many parts of the country. The milk producer companies that we set up in Madhya Pradesh, Jhansi of UP and Supal and Madhepura of Bihar. They all tell a tale that given opportunities, given the credit linkage, given skill opportunities, women-led development is a possibility on scale, and that perhaps is the answer to a developed India by 2047. That perhaps is the route to an India for all, an India which values social development as much as economic progress, and whose sustainable economic progress is built on the strength of its human capital across sectors.